This is Cinema Field Guide, a podcast that surveys the breadth and depth of film history, one movement or micro-genre at a time. I am Brian Loomis, joined by Felicia Maroney. How is your day going, Felicia?
Today's going great, but I
Yeah.
do want to say happy Father's Day to you.
Well, thank you. Yes,
How
it
was your Father's
was
Day?
a lovely Father's Day. Both kids had made little gifts for me.
Oh,
So I got a little this like shrink design thing for my keychain from my daughter, and
so
my son
sweet.
got me a little like frisbee that he'd markered up and is like a little craft thing. So
I love
yes,
them.
very
Those are the
fun.
best.
And then Hannah got me a very thoughtful gift. So I always now it's a bad habit, but it's the only way I can fall asleep and it works for me. I'm
Hmm.
watching something while I fall asleep,
Okay.
either a movie or a YouTube video or something. And so constantly falling asleep with my headphones in and such. But she got me a speaker that goes beneath your pillow and you can
Oh,
only hear it if you're lying on your pillow. Like we tried it out last night. She can't hear it at all, but something about it's like vibrating the pillow, and so you can hear it pretty clearly. Sound quality is
oh,
not like
yeah,
pristine, but you can hear what people are saying and stuff. And so very
that's
thoughtful
cool.
gift. And now I will not be waking up in the middle of the night with a headphone in and feeling very disoriented, or it
Yeah,
like falls out in the middle of the night and then I'm like
no,
searching the bed sheets for it the next morning. Very annoying.
yes.
So yes,
No, that's cool. I didn't know that those existed. It's
neither
nice
did
to
I.
know
Yeah,
that you have someone in your life who is very aware of who you are and
yeah.
what you like. Um, yeah, my daughter and I went searching around because of how our accounts are linked. I'm sure you know, where I was like, well, I can't buy
Hmm.
anything online because he's gonna see what I
Yeah.
get. So I was like, okay, I need to go to an actual store. And I was like, well, there's not many stores in Toronto unless I want to go downtown core to buy like Blu-rays. Because that's always what we get each other is Blu-rays.
That's nice.
So I found one spot in a random mall I'd never been to, and I was like, I can't believe the Sunrise exists. Kind of was like, I'm just gonna browse the shelves and see what they have. I got him a couple Blu-rays. One was Night of the Comet.
Ooh, okay.
There's a nice new Blu-ray for that. It's a great 80s movie that we both really enjoy. And then I got him, and maybe this is a little controversial, but we both really loved Kevin Costner's Horizon Part 1. I got it on
I have
Blu-ray.
not seen it.
Oh my
I
God,
know
I
it has
loved
Defenders
it.
though.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm a high defender of that movie.
yeah.
Huge. Loved it. Big fan. So I'm so excited that we have it on our shelf. So yeah, we always get each other gifts that we're like, well, we secretly want ourselves too.
They haven't announced a release for part 2 yet, have they? Did somebody
No,
buy it?
there was some controversy that happened on set that kind of is now the part two is in limbo. I don't know if it'll
Mm,
ever come out. But even if it comes out, I mean, it would be nice. I didn't get to see it in the cinema. I saw it on streaming during the winter break. It wouldn't have been this winter, the previous one, I think. But I'm hoping at least it comes out in some form because it is filmed and it's there. It's just waiting. It's like in, you know,
yeah.
jail right now, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate, but I don't think the odds are good for the
No,
subsequent parts ever being
I
made, but at
don't
least
think
the
so.
one that's already been made could be out
Yes,
in the world.
I
That
hope
would be
so.
nice. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how things go. So yeah, that was Father's Day over here.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Alice in the Cities, about not a birth father, but a character who could be considered a father figure to Alice in Wim Wenders' film, Alice in the Cities, which is his first film in the Road trilogy. And if we want a very quick synopsis of the film, it's about a German journalist called Philip Winter, and he has a case of writer's block when trying to write an article about the United States. He decides to return to Germany, and while trying to book a flight, he encounters a German woman and her 9-year-old daughter Alice doing the same. The three become friends, almost out of necessity, and while the mother asks Winter to mind Alice temporarily, it becomes quickly apparent that Alice will be his responsibility for longer than expected. I think it's a very beautiful film. I think it really sets up who Wenders is. I personally think it's a good spot to start off with if you're new to Wenders, but curious because I think I'm maybe a bigger Wenders fan than maybe you are. Maybe you've become one, or you're still kind of
Hmm.
like you appreciate, but I'm curious to hear what you thought about uh,
Yeah,
this.
it is in line with his other work. He does really capture what his style is in this movie and find something that's unique. And then he does a lot of variations on that throughout his career. They're not all the same. I liked this a lot more the second time I watched because it was a focused watch for the podcast. I think I'd watched it maybe on the treadmill the first time I watched it, which isn't the best way to experience. So watching it on my larger TV, got the Blu-ray, those beautiful Robbie Mueller images, like
Mhm.
it, it's sort of undeniable watching in that way. I had the same experience with Paris, Texas, where I wasn't really fully in love with it the first time, and then I got to see it, the restoration in theaters, and then just the imagery really catches you, even if the rest of it maybe doesn't so much. So I yeah, I had a good time with this movie and enjoyed watching it. And like you said, I think it is pretty indicative of what Vendors cares about and is good at. And he is interesting because his most well-known films are after the New German Cinema era. They're more
Yeah.
international co-productions. Sometimes they're thought of as New German Cinema just because he is associated with the movement, and they're not all that much later. They're like a couple of years later in the 80s with Paris, Texas and Wings of Desire. Cool. Well, more about Vendors. He started out his career as a film critic, actually. Did you know this before we did this? So, I don't know. Have you
I
done a
did.
series on Vendors or did you just do Paris,
No,
Texas?
no, I did a series on Mueller, Robbie Mueller.
That's
So
right.
his stuff
Okay.
did come up. So I did do Paris, Texas and The American Friend.
Hmm.
But I haven't done a vendor series. It is coming because there's so many of other films that I do want to tackle.
There's plenty.
But
Yep.
he's come up at least twice for sure on the show.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, not more than that, but at least twice.
Yeah. So he started as a film critic. He started directing a little later than some of the other directors we've covered who got their start in the 60s. Even Fassbender started in the 60s as well, a little bit earlier. His first feature, Vendors, was in 1970, and he makes three features that aren't very well loved and aren't really quite in his fully formed style until this film, which functions as a little bit more of his international breakout, and that's when he came to prominence. So 1974 is a little later of a start in terms of the movement itself. Is already maybe halfway done when Vendors really breaks through as an important voice, but because the films are so good and because he was so successful after the movement, I think he's one of the most well-known names of the movement in general.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like when you direct something like Paris, Texas, it's it's hard for you not to be well known. And I do think what the best thing about that is that his name preceding him is what leads a lot of people to discover those other directors because they're like, well, I'd like to see more of his work, how he started off and who he was inspired by and who he was working alongside. So I think I mean, at least for myself, he would have been the first of the three for sure that I got into, with starting with Paris, Texas, and then flourishing from there. So I think he's a lot of people's starter director in terms
Mhm.
of the movement, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Collaborates with cinematographer Robbie Mueller, as we've said. I probably should clear out for a couple of minutes, Felicia, so that you could talk a little bit about Robbie Mueller and what makes him so special, because I know you're a big fan.
Oh gosh, I'm a huge fan. He's definitely one of my no, not even he's not one of, he is my favorite cinematographer. Just one of my favorite human beings to ever work in film. I think his photography is so astounding. His use of handheld camera and wanting to shoot on film with natural lighting is really unmatched. And I think there's so many people that I've definitely tried to emulate that, and I think it's fantastic to try and emulate someone so great. And I really wish more people nowadays would take inspiration from that because if films look like they did, like his films now, I would be more inspired to watch more modern films because when I watch something like a Paris, Texas, or even the work he did with Jarmusch, 'cause he worked a lot with Jarmusch, he worked a lot with Lars von Trier, and it's all very different looking films, but it feels so real as you're watching it, and I think he was such a great inspiration. He was taken too young, but he left us with so much fantastic work. I think that if you're someone who's kind of even mildly interested in cinematography, and if you're getting into film and you're like, "Oh, I really like the way this film looks," and you're realizing, "Oh, that has to do with cinematography," and you're trying to figure out where to start. Miller is such a fantastic you're gonna have such a beautiful time with his work. I can gush forever, and I just
Mhm.
feel like the biggest smile on my face when I think about his work. He's such a great artist, and he did fantastic work with Wenders. I'm excited. That was a big reason why I was excited to talk about this one today also, because I got to talk about my boy.
Yeah. So they worked together quite a bit. They
Mhm.
worked together on 12 films from 1970 through 1995. A
Oh.
lot of Vendors' most famous films. I don't think they worked together on Wings of Desire, which is interesting, but also a
I
beautifully shot
know.
film, but not shot by Robbie Mueller. But yeah, like you said, Mueller works with several other directors, always great black and white or color photography. He is brilliant at both. A couple of shots in this in particular that stood out to me while we're geeking out a little bit. The I mean, all of the movement in the cars, but particularly towards the beginning in North Carolina, like a long shot in a car looking out the front dashboard, and then they pull into a beach parking spot, and the beach is just perfectly framed, and oh, it's beautiful. And then another shot of Alice right after she's taken a Polaroid of Philip, and his face starts showing up, but you can also see her reflection overlaid in the Polaroid. Brilliant.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah,
There's
there are
so
just
much
some
talent.
really stunning images here that are very captivating. And I think what stands out to me about this and vendors in general and Mueller as an artist in this movement is that we talked about with Schlendorf and Young Turles. how he has an understanding of film history and shot composition and the way things have been done for the past 50 years. With Mueller and Wenders, it feels like they're innovating in a way that's going to be influential for the next 50 years. And so it's very different, but very equally important and successful and just beautifully shot and composed.
That honestly, what you just said really felt inspiring to me because I think really what they were doing was kind of inspiring the next generation of filmmakers. And I think there's a lot of people, even American filmmakers, who were definitely inspired by the work that they were doing. And you see that with, as you mentioned, Von Trier and Jarmusch wanting to work with even Mueller, or a lot of American actors wanted to work with vendors and just seeing what they were doing with their career, but especially, and we'll 100% get into it because it's irrelevant to this film, but also Vender's career, his fascination with America and American culture, and how he was able to observe it from an outsider perspective without feeling judgmental, but also as a through a lens that that this person doesn't necessarily come from there. And it's a nice touristy feel that feels tasteful. And I say tourist as a nice way because I know tourist can be not
Yeah.
necessarily the best word, but someone where you're like, okay, I am a tourist in this land and I am wanting to photograph everything. Because even the shot that you mentioned, uh, I don't know that someone who is familiar with that area would find that as beautiful and would want to capture
Hmm.
that. It kind of takes an outsider to be like, "Oh, this is fascinating. This is not something that I'm familiar with," and find the beauty in that. So I think that's very much kind of the thief, what encompasses both of their careers and how they were
Yeah.
able to shoot America in a beautiful way, which we'll get into.
Yeah, absolutely. That outsider perspective sometimes can capture something truly special in some of the images. Just back to Vendors a little bit more and his style, and in particular, this is the first in the road movie trilogy, but the trilogy is reductive because he continued making road movies. Not all of them, but many more after the road movie trilogy. It really did seem to resonate with what he was interested in. The indeterminate searching nature of moving from place to place while looking for something and maybe not finding it, themes
Uh-huh.
of alienation. I I was struck thinking about this, and I think I saw that they co-directed something, and I was like, "Oh, okay." I think Wenders is a lot less French New Wave influence than a lot of the other directors in New German cinema. I think his, like, spiritual father, so to speak, would be Antonioni in terms of the
Yes.
themes of alienation, maybe a little bit slower paced, deliberately composed. Antonioni is a lot more interested in like romantic relationships and the impossibility of human connection there. And Vendors is a little bit more maybe existential about like the human condition in general. But they seem of a pair in a way that it just does seem like it brings a new and fresh voice to New German cinema beyond all of the other directors who are already working in terms of what he's trying to do that broadens the movement in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's so funny because I was actually gonna pick an Antonioni for my double bill later, but then I decided against it. So I
Yeah,
thought it was maybe a little too on the nose, and I was like, I've been obvious the last 2 weeks.
gotta go a
But
little unobvious. Yeah.
I think that he's very much of that vein because I thought of Red Desert a lot on this rewatch and kind of that you have a goal, but not really this kind of aimless search for oneself. And both of those directors do it differently, but they do it very beautifully. It also, I do think Antonioni takes requires a little bit more patience than Wenders does for most people, but they're, I think they're spiritual like cousins for sure.
Well, let's talk a bit about the road movie trilogy in general. So this is the first movie, then you've got Wrong Move and Kings of the Road. Wrong Move has been in the news recently. It's been withdrawn from the Criterion channel. Essentially, Natasha Kinski was topless in the movie at age 13. And apparently, I didn't know this before this week, but had been lobbying vendors to remove, I believe, the scene from the movie for more than a decade. And then finally,
Yeah.
vendors decided to remove the whole film from circulation with sort of a statement and an apology. So, were you aware of this before recently? Or I know we talked about it briefly.
I was definitely aware, and it had been also topic of discussion amongst film Twitter circles or film people circles, especially when you bring up vendors, because a lot of people, such as myself, are vendor heads, and then you'll get someone who quickly reminds you, hey, he's done some problematic stuff that's been out there and he hasn't really addressed it. And the actress in question has been asking for the removal of this. And it kind of, brings you back to reality that, like, this is not okay. I've only seen Wrong Move once and I haven't seen it in a very, very long time. And the way Nastasia Kinski has been treated in cinema in general, not even in just this film, especially in her young age, has been very questionable. I think that she was subjected to a lot and wasn't surrounded by adults who were protecting her. And I always feel very awkward watching anything that I know she's much younger in because she's such a fantastic actress. But she was definitely subjected to a lot of things that sexualized her that were not okay. And it's unfortunate because I think the film outside of that is good. It's not still not my favorite of the trilogy by any means, but it's unfortunate when things like
Yeah.
that happen. And I don't even think you can blame, oh, it's a product of its time. They were well aware. It's just it's just not good.
Yeah.
So it took him long enough. And I don't even know if I need to give him credit for finally doing it, but at least it's been done. So
Yeah.
that's a move finally. And I hope that she can rest a little bit easy, even though it's been a long time of distress for her.
Yeah, certainly a a good thing that that action has been taken per her request. I I'm not sure. I get that vendors would not want to just remove a
Uh-huh.
scene, would say the movie, has to be in the context of the whole of the movie, and this scene in particular, removing it would change the meaning of the film. My thought is like we have good models for how to do this and still preserve the film in a lot of the silent cinema that's had lost scenes and things. Like no one
Yeah.
would say that Metropolis is not worth watching because there are some like descriptions of scenes in between. So
Uh-huh.
I would say, you know, if I were making the decision and not Vim Vendors, I would say leave the film up, remove the scene that Kinski has requested to be
Yeah.
removed, and just put a description of what happened in the scene and why it was removed. Maybe at the beginning of the film you explain why it's been removed, and then you just put a description of what happened in the scene, missing scene, this, that, and the other. That feels like we could still have the movie to me if we did that. But if he wants it to be removed, he made it, so I think we probably should respect that.
I know. I feel like I'm more in line with you also, where like I get it, he made it, but it's also, as we both know, films aren't made just by one person, so there's a whole team. I get it's his vision, but I do think that we both watched so many films where they give like, I don't know if it's sometimes it's a trigger warning and sometimes it's just an explanation of what you might see if they even haven't removed it. Criterion does it, other platforms do it. Be like, hey, there's some language or there's some scenes that might be, offensive or are offensive. And I'm going to explain what those scenes are now so that you know ahead of time. You can choose not to or to watch it. I do wish that he had just removed the scenes and kept it up, but who knows? Who knows where his head is at? Maybe he's working on something in the background, or he just feels shame for doing it so late. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Might be. And then yeah, I actually had the Blu-ray of Wrong Move because it comes in the
Yeah,
trilogy. So when I'd rented Alice in the Cities, I had the Blu-ray of Wrong Move and was sort of planning on watching it, and then I saw all of
yeah,
this and was like, well, I have it, but I feel like they would not want me to,
I
either
know.
Vendors or Kinski would not want me to watch the movie, so I'll just skip it. But it's sort of a shame, I think, because it's a different, from what I've gathered, stylistic tone that's a little bit darker from
Yes,
the other in the road movie trilogy. And so that was really interesting to me as something that maybe I'd want more from Vendors, to go a little bit darker and less dreamy. But yeah, just not worth it. But anyway, you've also got Kings of the Road, which is also a lovely movie to finish out the trilogy. And yeah, the all shot in black and white in the period of 3 years. Like he's working
hmm
very quickly, and then The American Friend the year after that. Did you hear anything, Felicia, about how vendors had the idea for making this movie, like what the inspiration was?
I know that so previous to this, he had done an adaptation of the Scarlet Letter, and he really didn't enjoy his work on it. And the actress who plays Alice was in that, and he was just really inspired by her and wanted to create something that was a little bit more in line with what he envisioned a film should be. I actually haven't seen his adaptation of Scarlet Letter. It's been on my list for a long time to watch. I didn't realize until I was doing research for this that he wasn't a fan of it. I still will watch it, but I feel like I even feel more inspired to watch it because I think if it inspired making this film, I am even more curious to see what he didn't like on
Yeah.
in that film, what he had done so differently
Well, it's
with
just
that.
such a different thing than what he becomes known for, to do a period piece that's more of a literary adaptation. And Rudiger Vogler was also in Scarlet Letter, and the two of them had a scene of improvisation, and apparently that sort of was a eye opener for vendors of like, this is what I want, my movie to be. And so the looser improvisatory style really carried over to the feature. He carries over those two actors and essentially says, I found the spark of what I wanted. Now let's stretch that into a whole film here. So he could get funding for it. At this point in Germany, we're past the curatorium funding, which I think is
Mhm.
still around, but there were automatic subsidies for directors if they had established themselves in some form or fashion in the system and were making films already and had sort of proven that they could do it, then they could get automatic funding for subsequent films. So he had that funding lined up. And then he had the script, well, script such as it is, a lot of it was improvised, but at least the treatment written, and he almost abandoned making the movie because he saw a movie that I believe we're both big fans of, Peter Bogdanovich's Paper Moon. Lovely
Yes.
film. But they're traveling, they're in the car the whole time. It's a sort of surrogate father with a young girl who's trying to get her to her relatives. So there are a lot of surface level similarities. And Wenders saw it and was very discouraged of, oh, they've already made the movie that I've been planning to make, and almost
Yeah.
abandoned the project altogether, and then called another big favorite of ours, Sam Fuller, who convinced him to continue with the project. And I could just imagine that phone call of Sam Fuller being like, they're in your country, they are offering to fund your movie and your entire creative vision, and you're going to abandon the project? Like, Sam
I
Fuller
know.
would not stand for that. So he did end up making some changes to the script in order to proceed then with a different type of movie. But even beyond that, you know that Wenders would have made something stylistically different enough to stand out from Paper Moon, which is very much not his style.
No. And it's funny because it's hard not to see the similarities in those films, to be honest. But I think they work well as a double bill. I know that neither of us were that obvious that we picked Paper Man, even though I did almost do it. But I was like, I think I can do better than something that obvious. But you really can't go wrong with Paper Moon, and I think that Bogdanovich and Wenders are such different directors that they could get the same script and their films would turn out completely different, which is the mark of great artists who have different visions, I think. So I'm glad that, the Samuel Fuller got him to actually sit down and say, you know what, I'm getting money to make this film, so let's just get her done. I love
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. And Wenders was sort of on the verge of quitting as a film director and just being like, it's not for me, until he made this film and was able to make something that sort of satisfied himself artistically of, okay, I have a vision and I'm doing something that nobody else could do, not doing what everybody else has been able to make in the past. All right, let's get into the film itself here. The first question that I have for you, I'm really interested to hear what you think about this, Felicia. So, do you think in this movie the plot is serving the form of the movie, or is the form serving the plot?
I think in this case, for me at least, subjectively, the plot serves the form more so than the form serving the plot. And what I say that I think that when we, and if we're thinking of the form in terms of new German cinema, I do think that this film is quite different than a lot of the films that we're discussing. I mean, we've said this multiple times and we'll continue saying this throughout the series. All the films are different, but I do think this one stands out in a very specific way, that it feels more in line with the new Hollywood American cinema than it does with new German cinema, except it's still does have traits within the new German cinema movement, and we'll get into that, but I do think the plot, the aimlessness, the fact that it's not politically overt and the political aspects of it are very, I think they're mute a lot than they are in other films that we'll be discussing and we have discussed so far. I think you really have to dig deeper to find more similarities to the political sides of this film. I think this is about someone who really doesn't know what they want and but knows that they want a different life and is fascinated by the freedom that they think they can get in another country and realizes maybe it's not as free as I thought. Should I go back home? But realizes that maybe this is not for me and just doesn't know. They have the freedom of being able to not know what they want to do, but now there's also a child in the mix. And I think for both of us, realizing there was a time in our lives too where we could just be like, well, we don't really know what we want to do, what we're doing. And now we're like, I don't have time to think about that. And it's not really a
Yeah.
subject matter that a lot of the other films cover because I don't think that they're really thinking about just every day-to-day family life as much. So I think the plot for me is serving the form, and I do think there are elements of it. I don't think it's just circumstantially a new German cinema film. I think there are parts of the German culture that are take in it, and it does take part half in America and half in Germany, but to me, it feels very different from the other ones that we are covering, and I think
Yeah.
that's why it's so, for lack of a better words, accessible compared to the other ones, maybe, because it's easier to watch and more familiar for a wider audience. I don't know if you feel the same
Yeah.
way watching this, and if you
I
think
do.
that yeah.
I was trying really hard to phrase that question in a way that didn't tip my hand of what I
Yeah.
thought. So hopefully I pulled it off. But I do think the plot is serving form here, but it's a little subtle because reading that plot description, you'd say, that sounds like the plot of a movie that I could relate to. And in Paper
Yes.
Moon, it's a little bit more of form serving plot, and it's a very similar plot. But the way it's used here, a lot of there's some natural drama of things that happen throughout the movie, but it's really not emphasized like the excitement or the tension. There's very little tension in the plot, even though there's some natural tension, but that tension is just sort of allowed to sit because it's a movie that's very interested in its themes and the themes that are coming up. It's deliberately paced. It's a film that's very interested in its images. So I feel like it almost the plot being recognizable and like I can see where this is going and there's a recognizable end point for okay, this girl needs to find someone who's going to eventually take care of her, so you can see the arc of the movie from the beginning almost allows the plot to get out of the way so that other things arise. And so
Uh-huh.
I think that's really well done. And yeah, something that Vendors I think is pretty good at. Like a lot of the plots you could describe in 3 or 4 sentences of a Vendors movie, and someone would say, "Oh, that sounds interesting," and it sort of tricks you into watching something that is sort of pretty aimless and would otherwise be not something that somebody who's used to very plot focused movies would want to watch, right?
I agree. because I've recommended Wenders films to a lot of people and kind of described it. And I think people, there are dreamy elements to his films for sure, even something like a Paris, Texas. But I recommend that to people. I remember like a new friend recommending that to them, and they're like, "It looks beautiful," but I was like, who am I supposed to root for in this movie?" And I was like, "Who knows? It's up to you. It's very subjective." But I remember them feeling a lot angrier watching that movie than like someone like myself who was just so like, googly eyed watching it and being like, "Wow, this is a new form of film that I just have never seen before," because I was much younger when I watched this film. But even rewatching Paris, Texas, or even rewatching Alice in the Cities for this, I just was so it really reinvigorated my love for his work, even though Perfect Days definitely also reinvigorated that, which I'm sure we'll get
Mm,
into briefly later on. But he's still got it, and he's still working.
he's still got it, definitely. I think the relationship between Philip and Alice here is very interesting. Obviously, that was sort of the spark for the movie, is these two actors, how they were improvising together. There is heavy use of improvisation in the dialogue. How do you feel like that relationship plays out and how it develops over the course of the movie? Is that like the draw here?
I think it is, and I think it's what makes it easy to watch because, again, rewatching this as an adult who's now a parent, if I was watching this for the first time, I feel like I would have been a lot more nervous about the idea of a young girl being left with some random man that she absolutely does not know and is having to sleep in the same vicinity, take a bath in the same vicinity. That to me is something that's very anxiety inducing. The film tackles it, and it's weird because we mentioned Wrong Move, where a film doesn't tackle things like that necessarily as well, but this film does tackle it in such a very platonic and very non-sexualized way. There's no hint of anything sexualized at all in this film between the two, thankfully. It really feels like two people who respect each other, and sometimes it feels like he could be a stand-in father, and sometimes it feels like he could be her brother, where it's like they're kind of on the same plane level. And I think it does come from the improv between the two of them, where they obviously are two human beings who just get along outside of this film and outside of playing two characters. They're two human beings that get along and they have a great rapport, and it pours into the energy that we're getting from the characters that they're playing because they really feel safe like there's a safeness between both of them, and it makes it easy to watch because this is a film in the hands of someone else, in the hands of other actors, really could have gone badly. And I'm so glad it
Yeah.
doesn't. And I think that's why this film is so beloved and so easy to watch and rewatch because of that improvisation and relationship between the two actors, for sure.
Yeah. And they both get a little bit of an arc
Mhm.
where Philip is very disillusioned by the world, all of the brands around him, and very aimless. And then he is a little bit annoyed, like you said, when you're responsible for a human being, then you can't necessarily do whatever you want to do. And so there are definitely times when like Alice needs to eat food all of the time and is complaining that things are boring or whatever. And so he's not used to that and is having to deal with that. But at the same time, I think it sort of fills that emptiness being needed for this situation and needed to help her. He's annoyed enough, and I think the most remarkable scene in that is when she returns from the police station and gets back in his
Uh,
car. you can see how much he regrets like leaving her at the police station, and he's just like basically giggling when she gets back in the car and laughing at, oh, you know where to go now, and they're entirely on the same page, and it's so sweet. But
I
he
know.
has realized like she needs me right now, physically and emotionally, having been abandoned by her mother and really going through it. And so it does turn into this really sweet relationship. I saw more development and interest in Alice the character and what she might be thinking and feeling the second time I watched this. I think I felt a little bit more because it's not set up the same way that Philip's development is, where you're really thinking about the themes, and
Mhm.
there are several scenes of, okay, this is how he's feeling and processing things before we even meet Alice. But then you do get a lot more of her, how she might be feeling, her inner life to some extent, and it's very quiet. She doesn't really voice it, but I think watching more carefully, I felt like there was, Philip is still definitely the main character and the audience surrogate and probably the person that Wenders identifies with, but Alice is, I think, very well thought out as a character, and her what she is thinking and feeling has been thought about and makes sense in a way that I think is really nice.
I agree, because I think the first time I watched this really would have been, like, well over 10 years ago, and what I remembered from it was mostly his character, but on this watch, I was a lot more zeroed in to her. Again, I don't know if it's because I'm now a parent and I wasn't a parent the first time I watched this, but or if it's just on a first watch, as you said, you're kind of zeroed in on who the main character actually is, which is Philip. And then on a second watch, you're able to now see the broader picture and realize that how fully formed Alice is, that she's not just some little kid that he's taking care of. She's fully her own person, which I don't know that even vendors either intentionally did that or realize he does that. And maybe it's a collaboration between vendors and the actress, but it's a very great portrayal of a young girl her age, which we don't really get in films.
Yeah, and how her arc ends in particular, I think is really special. Like that last scene with the two of them in the train, and Philip essentially asks her, like, what are you gonna do now? And you can see that she is thinking through, well, I'm going back maybe to my mom who abandoned me, or maybe my grandparents who don't know me very well. And my life is still going to be very much controlled by the adults around me. And there's just this sort of like little expression that she gives and looks out the window. They both walk over to the window and look out of it, but it really is sort of performance magic in that last little moment from her, and I like that she gets the last little bit of like, okay, maybe Philip has resolved some of his purposelessness, but Alice still has like a long way to go and still has like these adults around her who are not great. So
I know.
very sad, but a good, like, I like that it sort of ends with thinking about her and what she might be feeling.
Exactly. That's why I think that again, the way that her character was developed is so strong because we get that it's like a cycle, she's going to become her own style of Philip who might go off, maybe not to America, somewhere else to go find herself as many people do. Some people might not travel to do it, but everyone has a point in their life where they're like, okay, I need to do something to figure out who I am. And Alice seems to have had to do that earlier than most, but she does have a very long life ahead of her. So Yeah, it seems like a downer of an ending, but it also kind of feels hopeful that she has that room to do that. So, in terms of Alice being very much her own person, I was reading a great piece by Alison Anders, fantastic director, who also was the assistant director on many, American Vendors films that he did, and went on to make her own great films, such as like Gas Food Lodging, and there's many films that she did. She did one of the parts in Four Rooms and others, but with the release of the Blu-ray with Criterion, if you're familiar, they often include essays by writers in the booklets, and they have them online for people to read. So it's in the show notes. But she talks about how she felt very in tune with Alice and the idea that we don't get to see a lot of kids be entirely their own person without being fully infantilized, where they're like, oh, we need to, save them and take care of them. There is that element to this, obviously, because at the end of the day, they're kids, but Alice does feel completely formed as a human being, as opposed to someone who is growing into a form. Again, she has so much room to become another person as she's growing, but we don't often get that with films and kids, and especially with young girls who get to do their own thing. I feel like there's a lot of films with young boys who are, put in positions where they need to kind of be in the adult roles, but we don't get as many with young girls. So that's why this film feels so fresh and, like I was saying, safe between the adult male character and young girl character, because I think, again, in hands of another artist or actors, this really could have gone sideways.
Yeah.
And I think it feels like a miracle that this didn't. And it feels so good to watch.
Yeah. It's the psychological complexity while still understanding that, like, this is a child, but essentially as they go throughout the search, I mean, Alice has been abandoned by her mother. She is distraught. She thinks maybe her grandmother is in Wuppertal, and then it becomes clear, I think, to her much earlier than she lets Philip in on that her grandmother is not in Wuppertal. But what are you going to do if you're a child and the only person who's like around to take care of you is has this thing in mind, and so she's just trying to keep him around, which is so sad, but then does eventually fess up to, no, grandma's not in Wuppertal.
Yeah, I just think it's really beautifully done. And I it's we don't really, now that I think of it, we don't really get any films that are not specifically kid films, that where the kid is not just a child of the family, and has a larger role. And I think it's because a lot of directors find it difficult to navigate
Yeah.
that balance. And it does take a director who's very good with kids to be able to tackle that, I think.
Mhm.
So no, I think it's very well done here.
Yeah. What role do you think the different settings that are featured in this film play in its overall mood, Felicia?
It's interesting, and I keep talking about how, the first time I watched this, but it had been a huge gap since I'd watched it too. So and I bring this up because my memory of the film was mostly set in Germany. I kind of completely forgot how much time that they had spent in America before they get on the plane to go back. And rewatching it, I was like, oh my gosh, he spends quite a bit of time even before he meets Alice and her mother. And they go back. And it's interesting because when you see him in America, then you see where his career went. And I think that's why, to me, this is such a great place to start. I really don't think that you need to watch his earlier films. I think if you're a completist, go back and watch those. But I would start probably here because it really sets you up for who Wenders is and his fascination with American culture. He doesn't tackle it in every film, but a lot of his most popular films tackle either American settings or American actors or American friends. And
Yeah.
I think I personally am not familiar with Carolina at all. This could have been set anywhere and I would not have known any differently if it was North Carolina or somewhere. New York though is New York. We all knew New York. Doesn't matter where you live. We all knew New York, and that felt so New York. And it's so interesting seeing these characters there and where they are. It really feels like it probably was somewhere in Manhattan. I'm sure they probably said it, but I think it's somewhere in Manhattan. And you feel kind of like I want to be here. I'm having a great time, but I also have no money to be here. And I'm like, I need to leave before I really can't get out. And I think, at least for myself, anytime I've been to New York, I'm like, I'm having a great time, but I need to leave before I spend every penny that I have, because New York's expensive. And when we get to Germany, I mean, I personally have not been to Germany yet, but there is the more vastness. It's interesting the Germany that he shows versus again the other directors that we have covered so far and will cover, because it seems more of a kind of shows a bit more of an emptiness to Germany than others do. Others are more kind of city-centered, people who are working class people. This feels like someone who is just kind of traveling through the countryside and areas of Germany that we don't get to see too much. And then we get the great, fantastic train shots, which I personally
Yes.
love a train shot in a film. I love any film that gets any scenes on a train. So there's a lot of fantastic on-location shooting in this film. Great use of film, budget, I must say. I
Hmm.
think he really
Yeah.
uses it to its full advantage, to
They
me.
shot it chronologically at each of the
Nice.
places, and you couldn't do it otherwise. You know, you have
No.
to be in the place really. And so it really does work. Like you said, the train, they're in Wuppertal, it's the Wuppertaler Schwebebahn. So, which is very fun to say, but it's
Yeah.
like this rail above the little train that goes around the whole city. So very neat. And all of the road movie is perfect for vendors in terms of the thematic, but it's so perfect for Robbie Mueller and all of
No.
the shots inside things that are moving and that forward progress throughout the movie from city to city to city, the way that he's able to capture images with that movement, but still capture the feeling of stagnation and emptiness throughout each of these places, of each place as just sort of like the last place. They still have Coca-Cola brand images plastered all over them and all of this sort of empty pop symbology that runs throughout the movie. How do you feel about that portrayal of like the all of the images of modernity as particularly empty?
It's interesting because as I was doing research for this again, I read that he was very inspired by, Yasujiro Ozu, and they were
Mm.
close enough friends, at least especially towards Ozu's later part of his career. And I only bring this up because I not recently, but I always think of like I think it's Tokyo Story or Late Spring where there's imagery of like billboards of Coca-Cola and
Late spring, I think. Yeah, I think
and you're
that's in
so
late spring.
immersed in like countryside Japan, like Tokyo, and all of a sudden you're hit with like a Coca-Cola and you're like, wait a minute. But they don't, it kind of feels empty where you're like, oh, this is something, capitalism coming into an area that you're just not expecting it to. And I feel like that's kind of the way Vendors tackles it too, where he's so disinterested in it, but he knows that it's part of, modern culture, so he has to acknowledge it in some level, but he doesn't want to go about it in a critical way. He's not going to make a statement about it, but kind of portraying it in such an empty and vast way is sort of making a statement about it
Yeah.
anyway.
The most explicit he gets is Philip's starting to write a piece and is sharing it with Alice's mother, Lisa, and he's writing about the television and says basically along the lines of it's not even that the shows are broken up by commercials that makes them empty, but the shows themselves are commercials. The images all like want something from you. And so this idea of modern media being empty and not filling us up in the way that art would, but requiring something from us of sort of emptying us and numbing us, making us dead inside almost, I think is part of what he's trying to do here. That definitely, the second watch, that stood out to me, that line of, oh, okay, he's like actually trying to say something about it. And of course he like wrecks the TV at the beginning of the
Mhm.
movie. So it's not exactly subtle about some of this stuff, but it definitely, yeah, stood out that sort of little monologue that he'd written in his notebook and is reading to Lisa. Well, what about of course, I think most movies that we've covered, we've talked about the soundtrack a little bit. So, what do you think about the soundtrack here, Felicia? And you added it to the outline this time and not
Mhm.
me. So,
I
I'm not
know.
the only one who wants to talk about the score all the time.
I know. I mean, this film was scored by Can, the band Can. It's just a German band, and if you're even remotely familiar with Fender's work, you know how important music is to his films, and he's not just using score only. He's often using like existing songs for the soundtrack, songs that are very familiar and place you in a time. We're getting, Chuck Berry songs in this film because I think the characters kind of know a specific era of America that might not be the era that America is currently in. But they're like, oh, this is the America that we know, and which is like 50s America. And at this rate, they're in 70s, and he probably haven't fully caught up to it. So we get that. But even fast forwarding to his more modern films like Perfect Days, like music is such a huge component of that film. And here, I think the music is so great to place you into the characters' mindsets. And it really, to me, explains who, especially Philip, is and what his interests are. Sometimes something as simple as what a character puts on to listen to willingly or might hear on the radio and continues to listen to as opposed to changing the dial says a lot about them. And I think he does that very well. And it's very apparent in this film. I think to me, the music really tells me who Philip is. At least that's how I read it. I don't know how you feel about the music
Yeah.
in this.
I read a little bit about it, and they can recorded this in a day at Vendor's direction without seeing any of the film. He just sort of told them what he thought would work or not work. And what it is it's this little like motif, a couple of minutes long, that sort of fades in and out at various times, but it's so effective in setting, mood, and drawing attention to certain moments. It's very dreamy, of course, and so that adds to what Vendors is doing with the atmosphere of the movie. And I think it works really well works really well for this, and then he does bring in the other sources and sort of curates the outside music as well, along with the other various media elements that he's pulling in.
Mhm. No, yeah. I think it's fantastic. I think that there's a lot of I go record shopping a lot, and I see often, like, his films in the soundtrack section. 'Cause I think
Yeah,
the soundtracks are very strong, which says a lot. You know, it's not a musical, but the soundtracks are things that people actually want to listen to outside of watching the film, so I think that says a lot about what his interests are and who he is as an artist.
absolutely. All right, well, let's zoom out a little bit, talk about how Alice in the Cities is important to the new German cinema movement and how it pushes it forward, how it relates to what's come to the past. What stands out to you, Felicia, here in terms of its relationship to new German cinema?
I think what stands out to me is kind of what I mentioned before, that it's definitely I would never argue that this is part of the movement, but it feels like it's pushing the movement towards where it's gonna become earlier than other films do. So I think it ends up being kind of a precursor to where a lot of directors end up moving towards and branching out, but it does it a lot earlier than, when the movement finally ends. So I think it's kind of preemptively telling you, "Hey, we're gonna start focusing on other things." Um, and I think it's because at this point, they are getting the automatic funding. So they're not so focused on being like, "We need to be in tune to what, the Oberhausen movement or manifesto was laying out," and not saying I wanna go against the manifesto, but saying that we're comfortable now, and we know that people are coming out to come see these films finally, so we can make something that feels more true to ourselves as artists, as opposed to being like, "I need to touch upon certain themes and ideas so people know it's part of this movement," despite the fact that I still think it's very much part of the movement, but I think it's pushing it in a direction that is very far outside of what, again, we end up getting even after this film, because it's definitely not one of the last in the movement at all. That's how I feel.
Yeah. I think because it's a movement that started with we want to make films that are meaningful and deep and reckon with all of this stuff, as well as the influence of the state funding and the way that they would sort of assess artistic merit of the films, and then especially the television co-production that was looking for very issue focused programming. There is a draw to plot and issue focus in new German cinema that needs a counterpoint like this, that is not very plot or issue focused necessarily, is not really, seemingly grappling with Nazism in any way, as many of the new German cinema films that we've talked about so far are. But,
Mhm.
there's a lot more that a film can do than just one thing. And so it broadens and makes the movement, gives the movement a little bit more variety, having Vendor as a part of it. So I'm really glad that he came around and made movies that were like this, that were very different from the other stuff that's around at this time and is part of the movement.
No, I agree. It's a breath of fresh air. As much as I
Yeah,
love the other films a lot, I do.
yeah. We've talked about some harsh films as well. There is a softness to this film.
I think so too, and I think there really is, like, a warmth to it. Again, it's not like it's a happy-go-lucky film where it's just all flowers and hearts, going around. There's some harsh realities that they need to face because again, there's the idea of a young girl who feels abandoned by their mother, which is not something that's light at all. But it's interesting how the film tackles it without villainizing the mother. And it's kind of what he does later on in Paris, Texas. So I really think this is like the precursor to that. And I know the Paris, Texas is obviously the bigger film. Maybe Alice in the Cities is the second biggest in his body of work. I'm not sure what people know the most, but I think it's a precursor to how he tackles the way parents are viewed and their own struggles. Because that's something very difficult to tackle. And as far as I know, I don't even know if he's a parent himself.
Not sure. I know he's been married at least a few
Several times.
times. Yeah.
But I don't know if he has
Yeah.
any kids.
I'm not sure. Yeah, didn't run into that.
I didn't run into that either, so it's interesting to me if he's not, and maybe that's something he experienced as a kid, and that's why he's taking that approach. Yeah, it definitely feels a little lighter than the other ones and easier to consume, and I think, but not in a way that you are not focused. It's not something that you can just watch and forget. I think it's something that does make you think in a different way than the other ones do because it's not politically, or it's less politically charged than the other ones. I think, there's still some political elements to this film, but definitely no war elements, that's for sure, in
No.
this one.
An easier watch than Young Turles for sure. But
That you could say for sure.
yeah, some of the political elements maybe would be, as we've talked about, the relationship to American culture, and that is a theme in New German cinema films, particularly in Wenders, but like you said, also in Herzog at times. And I think it's an obsession of the film industry as well, because American films had been doing so much better than German films locally. And even here in the midst of the movement, these were art house, maybe international hits, but they weren't big pop hits in Germany that were getting ordinary Germans to come out and see them in the same way that Hollywood movies were getting ordinary Germans to come out and see them. So I think that interest in American culture is very important for the movement in general and situating it in that international context when American culture of cinema loomed so much larger than the German culture of cinema even at this time.
Yeah, and I think even someone like a Fassbender, you see it through, even if he didn't set his films in America, you see the influence of American film. His influence of Douglas Sirk, who, wasn't an American filmmaker, but he was making his big films in America and was making very American films. I think when we see it even here in Canada, majority of the films that we're seeing are American films. There are some people, like the nerds like myself, who will watch Canadian film, but the average person absolutely is not. You're seeing mostly American. So it's hard not to be influenced by what America's doing because you're really such powerhouses in general, but when it comes to the film industry, you cannot beat. The only one who could come in parallel would be Bollywood.
Yeah.
You really can't compete between the two. Those are the two biggest ones, Hollywood and Bollywood. You can't compete. So I see why so many directors, and I see why Wenders was so inspired by it, and you really see the parallels between his version of New German cinema and what they were doing in the American New Hollywood cinema. And if you're listening to this and you're maybe not as familiar with that, but it's really at the end of the tail end of the 60s, a lot of independent American film was coming into fruition. A lot of people consider Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider as the kickoff for that. I'm sure there's arguments for others. I personally think something like The Swimmer was a good kickoff, but
The
that's a
Swimmer.
discussion for other times. Some people might fight me on that, but Easy Rider is known as Easy Rider. First, full circle, because as we know, Dennis Hopper works with vendors and American Friend. But what those directors were doing, something like a Dennis Hopper, Cassavetes, and many other directors were doing was they were pushing the envelope of making independent film their own way and not following the studio system. And you see that with New German Cinema, and you definitely see that with Vendor's version of New German Cinema versus someone like the two directors that or the few directors that we've spoken about so far. Even the Herzog that we spoke about, Aguirre, I think isn't as, American focused as he eventually goes towards. So Benders is very much the precursor to that.
Yes. We will eventually talk about the new Hollywood movement on this show, and it'll be a 50 to 70 episode season to get through all of the films. Maybe we
I
could just
know.
pick 1 year to do.
I know. My God.
And then
I
we
know.
can, you could do a solid 30 film season on 1 year of
Truly.
new Hollywood cinema. So some great films
My
there,
gosh.
but
That's
yeah,
my
we wanted
dream.
something a little more manageable, but eventually we'll find, I think for stuff like that, we're going to need to find ways to break it up into more manageable chunks. Yeah,
We'll need
for some
to.
of those real big film movements that are like, there's so many films that you just sort of feel obligated to cover or that you want to cover because they're so great. But
I know.
we'll get there eventually. But yeah,
Oh
I
my
do
gosh.
think, yeah, you see the influence, and I think I mean, you see young Mr. Lincoln being shown, you see he sees in the newspaper at the end about the death of John Ford. So there's a tie to sort of the old Hollywood and this fictionalized American identity of Henry Fonda playing Abraham Lincoln, and then Chuck Berry, like you said, the previous generation of American culture. So New Hollywood isn't particularly referenced in this, I think because what Vendors is going for is the emptiness, and I think he has things that he particularly likes about New Hollywood cinema and wouldn't see it in a lineage. He probably likes Young Mr. Lincoln too. I like Young Mr. Lincoln. It's a
So
good
do
film.
I.
But there's definitely, so I think he is pulling in some aspects of American culture that he thinks are positive or interesting or valuable, as well as ones that are empty and not additive and are trying to take something from you. So he is engaging with all of it, and that's how we engage with culture is you take the things that are valuable right alongside the things that want something from you, the interrupted by the 5-second ads that you have to skip and all of that sort of stuff. So we're
Mhm.
well familiar with it at this point, and I think it still rings true today the way he's dealing with that ever presence of culture, and it's all around you, and there's no way to capture the moment or find something deep because everything is bombarding you all the time. So yeah, I find it compelling.
I fully agree. I I think this is a great way. It's an unfortunate precursor to where we are today. This feels a lot more serene than what we are dealing with today. But if you go about it in a certain way, you can still find the beauty in modern culture, I
Absolutely.
think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. There's been a lot of talk about directors not really wanting to engage with modern times, and I think more are sort of taking that as a challenge and trying to find something interesting in modern culture to capture or be optimistic about, and I think that is a good thing. So
Same.
we'll see it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Vendor's other films, how this fits in with the broader filmography. What other films are worth watching? What films do you want to talk about, Felicia?
I mean, I do recommend watching the rest of the Road trilogy. Whether you want to watch The Wrong Move or not is up to your discretion, and there's absolutely no judgment. But Kings of Road is definitely interesting watch. The American Friend, I I feel like I don't even really want to give too much of a precursor, but I will say that if you don't gravitate towards it on the first watch, I think that's fully fair. I can almost guarantee on the second watch and the third watch, it's going to become one of your favorite films because every single time I watch this movie, I'm even more fascinated by it. I remember thinking, "Oh, this is okay," the first time I watched it, and then every time after that being like, "This is one of the greatest films I've ever seen," and it just blows my mind. But and then so is Wings of Desire, which is another huge one, fascinating one. I think if you're a fan of Jim Jarmusch, you have to watch Wings of Desire because it feels very much in line with his style of filmmaking. But you cannot watch Vendors without watching the one and only Paris, Texas. It's really just one of cinema's greatest achievements on various levels. I could talk days and days about this film. We've got fantastic direction, fantastic cinematography, fantastic acting. You get Natasha Kinski, Dean Stockwell, and the one and only Harry Dean Stanton, who just absolutely steals the show in this film. And I just don't see how you can watch this film and not feel affected by it. I would be fascinated to hear someone who absolutely hates this movie because I would ask for questions and answers to those questions and be like, I need
Yes.
you to tell me why. Everything's subjective, but I think that I
Yeah.
almost think that Paris, Texas is objectively just a fantastic film.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So
I got to
he's
see
got some
it
other films.
in a packed theater,
Ugh.
the restoration. It was incredible. Very
Yeah.
glad that I got to see it because it is a very image first movie, and it
Hmm.
was lovely seeing it with a crowd in that way.
Nice.
I've seen, and he after the 80s, he does make some things that are worth checking out. I don't know if he has anything new in the works yet after
I don't
Perfect Days, which
know,
was a couple of years ago. That is
which is
also
fantastic.
a great film worth checking out. He gets very interested in some other countries as well. He has a little foray into South America with some documentaries. And
Hmm.
I think he doesn't make as many documentaries as Herzog, but they feel to me very much on the same level of filmmaking craft. I just watched Buena Vista Social Club for the first time this week,
Mm,
and
nice.
it is a uh, concert film, but also incorporates elements of interviews and studio performance and all of this stuff that's blended together so well, and about Cuban musicians who do not come from wealth and are not wealthy now, but love playing music. And it is just a lovely film that just gets out of the way and lets that culture shine. And so that was a definite highlight from trying to dive a little deeper into vendors. I also a while ago saw The Salt of the Earth, which is
Nice.
about a photographer, and that one does it gets to, like, a pretty harrowing place, and so, like, this guy has documented the Rwandan genocide and several other really harrowing, like, war crimes, things, and you see some of the photography, and it's really gets to like the brutality of life at a little away from the dreamy idealism that's sort of Wender's sweet spot. So I really like that film, and it brings something new to what Wenders is doing, I think. So yeah, those. And then another road film, it's so long. It's 5.5 hours long, the
Yep.
version that I've seen. But I love ridiculously long films for whatever reason. If I like am watching a 5 to 7 hour film and I'm like 45 minutes in and it grabs me, I'm as happy as can be. I will spend the time with something like that. And until the end of the world goes in such
Yeah.
interesting directions, it's a road movie, it's science fiction. It's really fascinating and really good. So I like that one quite a bit as well.
Yeah. I do think it's like very interesting and honestly makes sense that so many directors in the movement made a lot of documentaries because as you mentioned, vendors made a lot. And I'm sure I don't know, maybe Fassbinder might have made some documentaries. I don't although I feel like he wasn't as fascinated with other subjects other than what was in his own mind, but we saw other directors in the movement make a lot of documentaries, even like Schoellendorf, who made a ton of documentaries after, and I think it makes sense for their mindsets to be focused on human stories because vendors made a lot of very like the documentaries that you mentioned, but he also did one on Pina that was very popular. Pina
Yeah,
Bausch,
I haven't
the
seen that one.
dancer, and he did one called Tokyo Ga, which was on director Yasuhiro Ozu, and he goes to Tokyo where he lived and all that. That's a very fascinating one. Just a little
Some
thing that I find interesting that a lot of
yeah.
them made documentaries because we don't get a lot of, not all directors make documentaries. There's only certain ones, like you see like a Scorsese who does documentaries and feature films, narrative films, but not all of them go between realms
Yeah. Yep.
like they do.
Let's get into our double features here. I chose I'm trying to do a different decade in a different country. So continuing that trend, it was difficult doing a different decade because you've got so many great performances of young girls to pick from in the 70s, like Paper Moon, like we've
I
already
know.
talked about, but also Spirit of the Beehive was another one I thought of where, oh, that girl's performance, and very similar to this, real naturalistic performance. But I did pick something from the 80s. I picked a movie called Landscape in the Mist. This is also a travel movie, but it is two children essentially who are trying to find their father. So they basically escape from home in Greece and go on a journey to try to find their father in Germany. It is a harrowing film. They are by themselves, and everything terrifying that could happen to two children by themselves happens to them. Very tough watch, slow cinema, but a good film and definitely worth checking out. It's really well done, and I really like Angelopoulos. He is not, I think, as big of a name of slow cinema directors, but he has some really, really great films and is a filmography that's worth diving into. Definitely.
I have not seen this, and but his name because I've seen The Beekeeper, so that's the only one I have seen
But
of
yeah.
his. And so I am familiar enough with the name, and I think I had heard about this, but you mentioning it makes me want to watch it, even though it's so funny because I'm gonna do this very quickly. Back
Mhm.
in the day when I used to go to TIFF, the film festival every year, back when it was affordable for the general public. I used to go every year, and every year they would have a series that was around called and I don't even know this is correct. It's called Around the World. Let's just say that. So they pick a country and they would highlight films from that year. And one year I went and it was Greece. And so I watched a bunch of Greek films. Every single one of those was one of the most depressing things I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it would ruin your entire day. And then you're like, cool, I have 4 other movies to watch today because it's 8 a.m. And now I have the rest of the day. So this sounds in line with it and very much something that I would watch. I am okay with watching depressing films. So I'm adding
Yes.
that to the watch list. All that
It's
to
his
say.
it's his most depressing film. If you want
Okay.
something also sort of an interesting pair, but Eternity in a Day
Okay.
is less depressing, but also that's more of like a father-son surrogate sort of thing, but same uh similar vibes of adult taking care of a child unexpectedly. So that'd
Mm,
be interesting. But Eternity in a Day is great. He's got several great films.
yeah. Okay.
What's your double feature?
I was thinking about if it wasn't obvious throughout my the conversation that we've had, I was thinking about new Hollywood films and some of my favorite new Hollywood directors. And for some reason, I was kind of stuck in the mindset of Philip wandering with a goal, but not being as focused, being very distracted by everything else, trying to get to his goal while he's in America. And I thought about Hal Ashby being a very much a director of that era, and I thought about, for some reason, The Last Detail and kind of how they have a goal in that movie, but they're going about it in the longest way possible, and they're kind of, like, lounging around and getting to one area of another. You could kind of call it a loose road movie, if you want, depending on what your definition of a road film is, but I think if you want something that's comparative in the New Hollywood era and tackles a certain area of America that I think vendors would be fascinated with. That would be my recommendation. I think Ashby's America is very interesting, especially his 70s films. I almost said The Landlord, but I thought that The Last Detail made a little bit more sense with this film, at least for me. And any excuse to recommend The Last Detail, I'll
Yeah.
take.
I like the idea of Randy Quaid as like a child that sort of needs watching throughout the
Pretty
film,
much.
similar to this. But yeah, that might be the most doughy performance anyone's given in any movie. I love that movie. It's
I
great.
know. It's so good.
Yeah. Hal Ashby is a real one.
No.
All right, where can people find the podcast, Felicia?
We are on YouTube under our name, Cinema Field Guide. We're on Instagram, Twitter, aka X. We're on Blue Sky, and all under our name, so you can find us there. And you can also give us or send us an email under cinemafieldguide@gmail.com. And we also have a website. Once again, cinemafieldguide.com, where you can find all the episodes in order for easy access to listen to. And you can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts on a regular basis. If you don't see the link, just write into the search bar and I'm sure we'll come up. Hopefully it will come up
Yes.
easily
We
and you can listen.
we were able to get Cinema Field Guide everywhere. Yeah, it
I
wasn't taken
know.
anywhere. And
Thankfully.
it's, yeah, short enough that you can type it in. And yeah, it's tough to find a name that nobody else has used. So
I know.
we figured it out for this one. We cracked the code. So, but yeah, this has been Cinema Field Guide. We'll see you soon.